How's it going, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning into this video. It is time to get this thing back together. I said in the last video that I need this thing running, and I need it running now. So it is Friday, April 30th, and it is after a 12.5-hour workday, and I need to get this thing going. This video probably, I'll work as late as I possibly can here until I just can't stand no more, and I will be back tomorrow to finish it up. But we got the block cleaned up and the engine bay cleaned up. As you can see from my last video, the heat shield on the firewall was just falling apart and no good. So I removed that. I cleaned up all the wiring, re-loomed it, especially right there. Little to no wire showing. I moved my old pressure switch. Got the wires down here all taken care of. The block cleaned up. I did check, to those who were wondering in the last video about the heads looking the way they did, what the rest of the motor would look like, and I did my absolute best as far as flushing everything out of the motor that I could. And I inspected the cam, and I inspected the lifters, and they all appeared to be okay. So the only real concern later down the road, of course, is the crosshatch in the cylinder bores and the rings. Again, I'll do a rebuild on it at a later date, but for right now, I need two vehicles, and my truck has just been driven all over the place. So we got new heads over in my toolbox. I got the new valve cover gaskets and head gaskets. You can see we are going back with ARP head studs and new fuel return lines for the injectors. I did reuse the old injectors because there was nothing wrong with them, but brand new heads, new valve seals, new valve seats, of course, on new heads. It's cleaned up the rockers, of course, got the lifters that look to be okay, and cleaned up the push rods as well. So let's get this thing going back together, and we'll start by putting the lifters in. This video won't have too many time lapses in it. I will primarily be going over the torque specs and how to throw it back together. So let's get to it. Alright, so let's talk about lifters real quick. A 6.5 is equipped with roller lifters. What does a lifter do? Why is it called a roller lifter? How do you install them? So a 6.5 is equipped with a roller lifter. A roller lifter is easy to identify. It has a roller on what would sit on the camshaft. For your intake and exhaust, the camshaft has lobes on it depending on which valve it is opening. So on the camshaft you have a lobe. Let's pretend that's my knuckle there, and the roller stays in one spot, and then you have that lobe and it pushes the lifter up. When the lifter is pushed up, it forces your push rod up. That push rod then pushes on the rockers, opening, closing your intake and exhaust valves. So roller lifters go one way, only one way. How do you prevent this lifter from rotating? You have a little guide plate. You can see on the lifter itself, it has a flat spot on both the top and bottom. This little guide plate fits ever so perfectly and has two little flat notches in it that keep the lifter from rotating. If your lifter was to rotate on the camshaft, it being a roller lifter, you will ultimately mess up your lifter and your camshaft, and you'll be tearing it down further than what I have it at this point. So the lifter sits in the block, rides on the cam. Your guide plate sits about right there when the camshaft, or the lifter is not being forced upon by the camshaft. When the lobe comes up, it will push on the lifter, then pushing your push rod and making your valves open and close. Let's talk about a little bit of controversy behind which way does the little oil hole go. This is the way I've been taught. I know it's going to spark conversations in the comments. Keep it civil. This is just the way I've been taught. This is the way I've been doing it, and I've never had an issue with it. Put it back the way you found it. The little oil hole, you get on the forums and you look, which way does the little oil hole go? Well, a lot of people are going to tell you, put it back the way you found it in the spot that you found it. Don't be mixing lifters on the cam, especially if you're going back with the original lifter and you still have the factory cam in it. But if you can't remember which way the little oil hole goes, rule of thumb, I've always pointed the little oil hole towards the oil pump, which is in the back of the motor. Keep the comments civil. That's just the way I've been doing it. That's the way I was taught, and I've never had an issue with it. Some will say that they've had issues with it. You get on the forums, get other people's opinion, but ultimately put it back the way you found it, and if you can't remember, ultimately it doesn't really matter. That being said, so you have your little indexing keeper. What holds it down is a little strap, basically. It puts force on that keeper, and of course on this other side you would have another one, and it keeps that retainer in place. Before I go ahead and install this, I'm going to drop it in a little bit of oil. I'll show you that on the engine. I have the rest of the lifters installed. So you can see on cylinder 2, I got this lifter installed, and on cylinder 4, I have both the lifters and the indexing keeper. You can see that the lifter over here is pushed up, and the lifter over on this side is almost flush, not quite, but it's down, so up and down. This lifter is on one of the camshaft lobes. If you look down inside there, you can see the camshaft. So that's the way it's indexed. You come over here and you can see that hold down plate is forcing upon both this keeper and this keeper over here. To install, take your lifter out of your little oil bucket. I'm making sure that my oil hole is facing the rear, and you let it fall into place. There we go. And then you take that little retainer. Let's see if I can get a decent shot with one hand here. Just like that. And then you get your little hold down plate. Also kind of a pain in the butt to do with one hand. And just like that. So those bolts get torqued to anywhere between 18 and 26 foot-pounds. I usually just split the difference. I've never had an issue. And I've already got this one, and that one over there torqued. So this is the last one I need to do. And we will continue. Hey y'all, future me. So I just want to talk about what I just said right there, because I know I kind of ramble on and forget things and talk about nonsense. But regarding the lifters in a 6.5, a 6.5 and a 6.2, it does not matter which way the oil hole goes on the lifters when you are installing them. You can put them towards the front, put them towards the rear, or put them back exactly the way you found them. I recommend putting them back exactly the way you found them, but me forgetting which way I found them, I personally just put them all facing the rear. But it does not matter which way that little oil hole goes. If you can remember, I do recommend you putting them back in the way they go, and I very strongly suggest you put them back where they went. So over time, the cam and the lifter will wear on the lobe evenly. I recommend putting them back where you found them so they can continue to wear the same lobe with the same lifter. That's just what I've done over the years, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. But it doesn't matter which way the little oil hole goes. I just put them towards the rear. That being said, let's get back to the video. So it is the next day. Wanted to leave off where I had everything as far as getting the lifters installed. So the lifters are installed and the hold downs are torqued. Now it is time to put the head gaskets back on. The head gaskets themselves, there's only one way that these head gaskets go on. You can mess them up. However, it's pretty self-explanatory which way they go on. I will show you in a second. But before you put those head gaskets on, I recommend picking up a tap and die set to chase the threads in the block. So let me get you off the stand and show you what I'm talking about. So I have my little tap here, and what we're doing is just cleaning up the threads before the studs go in. You're going to hit every single one and get them all cleaned out. Reason you want them cleaned is because if you see, right here is a water jacket. Coolant flows through that hole, and conveniently, well, let's see if I can find a better hole. Right here. Here's another water jacket, and you can see my finger on the other side if you can. Let me turn up the brightness on this light. There we go. Alright, so if you look closely, there's my finger on the other side. So the head bolts and or studs go into a water jacket. To prevent, get back on the stand here. There we go. To prevent coolant coming through that water jacket hole into through the bolt, you're going to put some sort of sealant on that stud and or bolt. So this one is nice and cleaned. I brake cleaned it so there's no oils on it. And I'm going to use Teflon tape. So I typically go in the way of the threads. That way, as you're tightening this bolt and or stud, the tape or sealant is not going to fall off. So I'm rotating clockwise, and I'm just laying a good solid strip on that stud. And then you're ready for install. Some people may be wondering, do I have to do a zip tie trick in order to put these studs all the way in the back of the head? You can, but it is not necessary. Let me move this tap and die set real quick. You can see I already have the driver's side head in there. I got the studs in their places, but I left this back one without a nut on it. Let me see if I can get you this back one right here. You can see it comes close. That wiring harness kind of gets in the way, but you can easily remove and install the stud. You do not need to do the zip tie trick in order to put studs in your motor. If anybody is curious about that, what you would typically do is on the bottom of the head, you can see that the stud comes out. What you'd do is you would suck the stud back up into the head, and you would zip tie it right there so it does not hang down and you mess up the deck on your block. So I already got all those holes cleaned up. I'm going to tighten that last stud down. It's just going to be snug. The Allen hole on the stud is a 3/16. Basically, you're going to go get on the stud and you are just going to snug it down. Sit it down there. Bottom it out till it stops. So that one is snug, and then you, goddamn, tap and die set, you are ever so conveniently right in the way. Well, who put you there? You grab your washer and a nut. Put the washer on, put the well. And put the nut on. You can see all the way back there. If anybody, and this goes as far as somebody buying a 6.5 and the seller claims that the heads are studded. A good way to tell without even removing anything off the engine is you have four, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, what would be bolts and or studs depending on the claim that are outside of the valve cover, and you can easily see whether the engine is studded or not. If it is studded, of course, it is going to have a stud and a nut. If it is not, you're going to have a head bolt. Alright, so I've Pretty well got one side done. We are going to get the passenger side on, and I'll have a little time lapse of that. Be absolutely careful. Oh, I'm gonna show you that head gasket real quick. So the head gasket goes on one way. You can see that this hole and this hole are larger than this one, and this one. Those two larger holes are going to sit on these two dowel pins. If you try to put it on wrong, you can see that dowel pin just does not fall in place. That hole does not line up correctly, and it is on wrong. Put it on the right way, and the gasket falls into place. So after you clean up the deck of your block, put your head gasket on, and then put that heavy head on. So we'll do a little time lapse of me putting the passenger side head on because it is the more difficult one. So. so let's talk about torquing down these ARP head studs. So let's initially start with the factory head bolts, okay? Factory head bolts are torqued to 20, 55, and then 90-degree turns. So if you're already torqued at 55 foot-pounds, you would then turn 90 degrees. That torque comes out to approximately like 100, 115 foot-pounds, somewhere in that range. ARP tells you to torque them to 90 foot-pounds. I've also heard of stories people torquing their brand new head studs down to 90 degrees, putting a little bit of boost to it and blowing the head gaskets again. That is no fun. And where the factory head bolts initially take more torque than 90 foot-pounds, torque the head bolts the head studs more than 90 foot-pounds. Ginger Snap Customs has a pretty good video on this. You know, I give credit where credit is due. He made a video on it, so shout him out there. But we are going to torque these head bolts to 120 foot-pounds. I've done it before. I'll do it again. There's no problem with torquing these head studs to 120 foot-pounds. Of course, the torquing sequence, for anybody curious, basically you just start in the middle, work your way out, and that goes for both heads. So let's get to it. I already have the driver's side torqued, just not to waste you guys this time watching a super long video, but let's get the passenger side torqued. So installing push rods, I've got all these ones in and the rockers torqued. I've got these ones all in, these rockers are not torqued. You can see that this one's flopping and this one's flopping. When tightening these two bolts down, you want to make sure that you're not only in the lifter by pulling on it and making sure there's a little bit of grab right there, that it also falls in this little cup that's inside the rocker. So when you tighten those down, you'll just be careful, make sure that those go where they're supposed to go. Installing the final push rod, I usually like to dunk them in a little bit of oil and absolutely make a mess of everything. Where you go? There you go. And then checking to make sure that they're in the rocker. I'm sorry, the lifter. You just give them a little tug. These ones are all in the lifter. See how that one had really good bite on it. It's all a feel thing. And then also I like to dump the rocker assembly in some oil as well. Just get everything nice and lubed before it goes in. There we go. Makes a mess doing it this way, but I know at least everything is oiled, at least upon first start. And okay, so those are all where they're supposed to go. It's looking my oil out of here. Yeah, that's right where it needs to be. Now the torque on those bolts is 40 foot-pounds. Just go easy between the two bolts per rocker shaft. Just cycle back and forth. And it's starting to tighten up. Let's see. That's 40. That one's 40. That one's 40. Alright, so see if I can't get the back here with y'all watching. And you gotta hold that push rod up until it makes contact, or else you'll be off and cause a lot of damage that way. Let's go to the other one real quick. Okay, that one's starting to fall into place. Back to this one. Make sure it's up. That one just fell into place. Let's tighten the back one the rest of the way. There we go. Starting to push down on some valves now. That's still good. 40. 40. 40. Just, see, that one was a little loose. And 40. Now time to, I'm going to spin over the motor, just make sure everything's rocking nice and neat. Make sure nothing comes out, make sure all the rockers are going back and forth, and then throw the valve covers back on and the injection lines. is the next day. I have different clothes that are soaking wet because I just got done flushing the coolant out of it. The reason being it's the next day and I didn't record the rest of putting the engine back together. I wind up snapping the little tabs off the glow plugs on 2 of them. And I was fighting with the camera prop or my tripod there, and you know, if you take the intake and stuff apart, you should be able to put it back together just fine. But we're all back together. New oil filter, flush the coolant, and prime the fuel. So let's give her a start here. Runs good. No weird noises that that I'm hearing or anything like that. I know some people are gonna ask me about those return lines, where I got them, and here is the little baggie. And it's this rubber line with braided material. I just originally bought it off eBay because I liked the way it looked and I wanted to try it out. I have braided lines on my truck, but I wanted to give these ones a shot. You can see new bolts for the AC compressor bracket. And everything is nice and tight and where it's supposed to be. Got all the wiring loomed up and old pressure switch relocated. And I'm excited to have it back on the road. I'm gonna bring it up to temp, make sure everything is a-okay. If I can get this phone in, there we go. We're gonna bring it up to temp, take for a little test drive, take you guys along with us. I'm gonna degrease the engine bay, make it look a little nicer, but I'm excited, so. Alright, so I just got back on a little test drive with it. Temperature stayed right where I wanted it. Oil pressure stayed right up where it's supposed to be. And of course we degreased the engine bay and put a light in, and it runs great and is back on the road again. I'm super excited to have this truck back on the road. And I'm actually surprised at how good this engine bay cleaned up. Getting that heat shielding off the back was definitely a plus as far as looks go. But it cleaned up very well. And overall, I'm just happy that the head gaskets are done. That compressor bracket isn't going to fall off again. And this video about how to replace the head gaskets on a 6.5, the second part, has come to a close. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope this was a learning experience for some. I hope the rest of you enjoyed the video. More 6.5 comment to come for sure. And this thing is going to start finally looking different and not so missing paint-ish here in the near future. So stay tuned for those videos. But if you are interested in this truck, my personal truck, please check out the wife and I's Instagram. If you're interested in more 6.5, 6.2, 6.9, 7.3 IDI, do some content, or even the Mercedes diesels or Oldsmobile diesels, check out IDI Legends. I'll leave all the links in the description below. But thank y'all legends so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.